My name is Jasmine Mithani. I'm a developer at a company called DataMade. And this talk is going to be all about leveling up Leaflet and making more complex maps. So about me, wow, my emojis are broken, so this is heartbreaking. But I'm Jasmine. I use she, her pronouns. I learned how to code at community college. And then I ended up, I had taken a gap year from U of C, so I came back, studied gender, art, and media. I worked as a game developer at a social activism company. I worked as a UX designer. I did a brief stint as a graphics journalist, and now I code Python and JavaScript full-time, as well as being the deputy editor of a local news magazine. And about DataMade, we are a civic tech company. We are fueled by open source. We maintain several tools, as well as open sourcing as much of our work as possible. We aim to distill complex information into meaningful insights. And most importantly, for right now, we love maps. So this is going to be our agenda for the day. I'm going to talk about Leaflet briefly, and also then DataMade's approach to making maps with Leaflet. And then I'm going to go over this pattern that we have, which is AJAX, object, and map layers. Then I'm going to go over some considerations for the way that we use our maps and what kind of data we use to build them. And then I'm going to touch on a few extensions. So first, Leaflet and our approach. So what is Leaflet? How many of you have used Leaflet before? Okay, that's good. So Leaflet is an open source, mobile responsive, and highly customizable JavaScript mapping library. It's flexible. It runs on OpenStreetMap, which is open source, which is another reason we love it. And again, yeah, highly customizable, which I'm going to talk about today. So we use Leaflet to create complex maps. And when I say complex, I mean we have multiple layers of interaction, or we have many different types of data on the same map, such as choroplasts. We have bubbles occasionally, or we have locations. Here's an example from a project from the Erickson Institute, where we used bubbles, and then we had an underlying choroplast. So the pattern that I'm going to talk about today, we used to create this map. At the end of the talk, I'll go ahead and pull this up on the screen so we can see how it's interactive. So first of all, JavaScript is not inherently object-oriented. And some people would say that's the beauty of JavaScript. But the real beauty of JavaScript is you can make it whatever you want. And we at DataMade, we write things in Python, so it's objects galore all the time. We wanted to organize our JavaScript in similar ways to our Python code, both for internal consistency and also when we are teaching. DataMade trains junior developers, and this is an easy way to make sure that they're learning specific patterns that can be applied across the stack. So there's some scoping issues that could happen with when you don't use object-oriented structure. And we use Django, and that also, using objects this way allows us to have a cleaner file structure. It's reusable across many different projects and applications. And as I said earlier, we prefer patterns over frameworks. We use mostly vanilla JavaScript, and we don't use anything like React, at least not yet. So object, AJAX layer, which has been reversed from what was previously AJAX-object-layer. So how do we make a map? First, we create a map object. Then we initialize the map. We fetch data, and then we add that data to the map in the form of a layer, and then we remove the layer. So this talk, I'm going to be showing a lot of code, but hopefully I'm also going to try to explain it conceptually, and there'll be plenty of time to ask questions at the end, and I'll also pull up a more interactive code example. So creating our map object is really easy in JavaScript. This is JSON format, JavaScript object notation. We're making a variable, and then we are going ahead and declaring, just for here, declaring our variables. And objects, quick refresher, objects have both data and methods to manipulate that data on the object. So right now, these are the variables that will store our data. All right, how is everyone doing? Following along? We're doing okay? Okay. All right, so in this map, what we are going to do is we are going to make a map of Chicago. It's going to have all the libraries on it. It will have census tracts, and we're going to add some stuff to it later. So first thing we're going to add right now is we're going to do an initialize function. So here's the beginning. Sorry, let me two-hand this through now. Let's see. OK, so in your initialize function, what you're going to want to do is add tiles. Those are the basic things from OpenStreetMap. Stamen has a bunch as well. I know those were used in the Leaflet workshop from earlier this month, I believe. You also would want to add a legend, and it can load the default data that you want the user to see first. So beyond that, we will also have an initialization function for each layer. So a quick note on data. All of the data they'll be using, and most of the data that we use at DataMade for mapping is in GeoJSON format. It works well with the web. It is easy to integrate with JavaScript, and it's pretty standard. So our initialization functions are just going to be called make census layer, make library layer. So in order to do that, we have to have data. So what we use is something called AJAX, asynchronous JavaScript and XML. Not a great acronym. But what it does is it allows us to fetch data and also update the page without reloading it. So for instance, for this map, you're not always going to want to control the map via Leaflet has some built-in tools on the controller where you can just switch with radio buttons. Occasionally, and often for a lot of the maps that we build, the controls are on the outside. They're too complex, perhaps, to be put into a small controller, or we want to keep that controller for something else. We want to display data there that wouldn't be on a sidebar. So we fetch data multiple times. One, as soon as we load the page to populate it with the default, and then we fetch it and whenever we change. And so for the sake of this, we're going to say it's whenever you click a button that says census, the census will show up. You click libraries, library shows up. And in order to do this, we're going to use jQuery. Yay, jQuery. Much easier than vanilla JavaScript, but of course has its own set of difficulties. So how do the AJAX calls interact with the object? So all of the AJAX calls should be outside of the object. The object should just have the internal logic for building the map. And the data from the call should then be passed into those methods. So this right here is saying, if there's an element with the ID library, so that's going to be the button we're going to click. We're going to click it, and then we're going to use the getJSON function to fetch from this URL where we could get our library data. In actuality, I got it from the City of Chicago data portal, which is an awesome resource. So then after we get a 200 response, then we go ahead and use our function myMap, and then we add the library layer. So this is how, when we're working with objects, that's how we access it. We do the name of the object, and since it's a method on the object, it's like that. So there is this other thing, AJAX, which I realize isn't a prettier slide. So for the jQuery documentation, you can use AJAX. When you use this AJAX function, you can only use it once. So you can use it once to load the initial data on the page, but then every time you click something else, you won't be able to get this to work. And also, it's a low-level function, so you're using it every time you use get or load, and we're using get.json. Get.json is useful because then you don't have to worry about parsing the JSON. So this is an example using AJAX. What it would look like is you have your URL. Then, again, we're declaring what type of request it is. It's get request. We have this handy console log, so we know that it worked, or at least that it fetched the data. And then, again, we pass it into the object. So I talked about layers. So layers have two meanings. One, I do mean, like, conceptually the geographic layer. But then also, each one of those has a corresponding leaflet layer object. So for this one, it's just thinking of it, like layers of a sandwich. You have bread, which is the base tiles, and then you have lettuce, and then tomato and bacon. And those can be things like the census tracts, community areas, and libraries. And those are all, again, different types of data. And this is for ease of control. You can easily add or subtract layers. Leaflet makes that very easy. And you're also only loading in the data once. You don't have to fetch the data every single time. You put it into a layer, and then keep it there, and then just add or remove the layer. So this is what layer logic looks like. It is pretty readable, but you're checking to see if the map has the layer. Recall that we had defined our layers as null. So let's say we only want to show one type of geography. We either want to show community areas or we want to show census maps. We don't want them on top of each other because that'll be a tangled mess. So first, we're checking if the map has the layer, and we're using the this keyword because we're referring to the object and referring to an attribute of the object. And then, so we're checking it, and if it has that, we're gonna remove it. And then we're checking to make sure that the community areas layer exists. If it doesn't exist, we build it. And if it does exist, we add it to the map. This is also, layers are helpful because I think they make sense when you just think about, just like using Google Maps, things like that. We interact with map layers a lot. And also, this is very readable syntax. As long as you have verbose variable names, and even if you don't, you can pretty much figure out what's going on. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about considerations. And again, don't do extensions, and then I'll go through some more interactive code examples. So an issue, for instance, when I showed the Ericsson EDI map where we had the bubbles on top, we have to be very careful when we talk about what different types of data to layer on top of each other. It can be all sorts of spurious correlations. For instance, these have no effect on each other, yet they are highly correlated. This can be more sinister when we work, for instance, Ericsson is early childcare, health, education, things like that. And that data, when combined incorrectly, can be used to make false arguments that are very compelling based on the beautiful maps that we have built. So we use object-oriented programming because it's what we use all the time in Python. But that doesn't mean you have to use it. And like I said earlier, we don't use frameworks. I don't know, this should be flexible enough to work with React or Vue, but that wasn't part of our design process when we came up with this. Again, there's performance limitations with Leaflet. You can't have a whole lot of data, and also with fetching. If you fetch lots of GeoJSON files, that's gonna take a long time and you're gonna have a lot of lag. And also, you have to change it. If you wanna change it, you have to know JavaScript. Things like CartoDB, for instance, you can integrate with Google Spreadsheets, so somebody who doesn't know how to code can update it. That is not the case with Leaflet and what I presented now, without lots of customization. So extending this a little bit, one thing I did talk about, so there's layer groups. The way that I will show you, the way that I conceived the points of the library is they're already in a GeoJSON file, but that's a perfect world. A lot of times they're in CSV files or some other way that you need to work with. So Leaflet has this thing called circle markers, which is a type of marker object. And this is one way then, each one of those is a layer. You make a layer group of all of them, and then you add those to the map. And then it's also very simple. You add the layer group, remove the layer group. It's the same thing. So for performance optimization, I just said, when you have a lot of geographic data, that can take a long time to fetch and load each time. So if we're sticking with our one layer per geographic layer, let's say you have Chicago community areas, and you want to show population, and then you also want to show something like another cool thing that you would show with a choropleth. So you would, instead of reloading that and making those different layers, which you could do and just add and remove them, you can cycle through, you can use GeoJSON to your advantage and cycle through those and instead just update the coloring. That way you only load the geographic data in once, and when you update, it's extremely fast. Yeah, are there any questions? Yes.
2 questions.
Okay.
First question is like simple. So you said for my clarification, so you said AJAX construct can be used only once. Can you clarify that? Like, I can't make like multiple calls using AJAX?
So you can make multiple AJAX calls, AJAX the concept, but just that specific function where you use AJAX, you can only do that once. And that's why we're using get or load.
I mean, like on a page or
yeah.
A function or a thing on a page?
On a page, yeah. When you do document ready in jQuery, you can only run the AJAX once. You can't run it multiple times. We can talk about it more later. We can get more into it. I don't know the mechanics off the top of my head.
I recall using multiple times using a function as well. Maybe not losing successive handler making subsequent AJAX calls. But anyway, second question is if you would be able to provide an insight into visualizing real-time data on Leaflet. If that's possible, and if yes, then what's your approach?
It's possible. Yeah, so the question was, how would you visualize real-time data on Leaflet? That is something you can do. It would probably have some sort of stream checked and then updated accordingly and have things cached, I think. That might be a way to see. I would try to use layers in the sense of only updating if enough things have changed, and using the feature thing I talked about where you iterate through and recolor versus building a whole new layer. But I'm not sure, we haven't, or at least I have not used this for real-time data. Leaflet is used for real-time data, but a lot of companies that use real-time data, I'm thinking like Uber, things like that, they have their own tools because I talked about, with data and loading, it gets very slow very quickly. And it's worth it for people to optimize it and customize it to their needs. I actually think Uber has a specific visualization tool, if you're interested in that kind of thing, that they've open sourced.
Yeah, I'll forward about that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes?
Yeah, I just Googled it. There's something called Leaflet Real-Time. It looks like you just set like a interval property, and then you can pull like some endpoint, and it'll just keep feeding in data. But it's like somebody made a library for it, and it has like 500 stars on GitHub.
Yeah, Leaflet.
That's any indication of anything.
Yeah, Leaflet is, again, highly customizable. There's a lot on their website. They actually list a lot of like third-party or open source libraries that people have added to build on top of it. There's a really active community That's something that's very important to us as we work in open source. Nobody wants to use an open source tool that is poorly documented and they can't ask anybody for help. So Leaflet is not any of those things. The Leaflet tutorials online are also incredibly useful. There's particularly a choropleth map one that is kind of a starting point for people at DataMade. We tell them to go through it, or anybody who wants to learn how to make a map in Leaflet, I recommend that. But a lot of it just focuses, it doesn't give you enough to get from, I have a map with pretty colors, to something that communicates more complex information. Yes?
Yeah, I have a question about how easy it is to get a different base map on there. Because I've used some tools where they just kind of give you an out-of-the-box thing, and then you're like, there's too much stuff on the screen, I want something that's clean. So was it easy to put a different underlying map layer that's out of the box?
Yes, so this one uses Mapbox. No, this uses Google, but Mapbox is one of the more standard ones, and you get an API key from them. And Mapbox is highly customizable. Also, just in terms of different styles, not necessarily, like showing rivers or like highways, things like that. Mapbox is incredibly robust, and you would be able to control that. I've only really ever used the basic Mapbox plan. I'm sure more features and customization is unlocked when you pay. Yes.
So I have two questions. First one, if you do Python web framework, if so, is there any restriction using Leaflet because it's based on JavaScript? Okay. And second question is, how do you protect your data from being stolen when you visualize using Leaflet?
Yeah. So first, we use Django framework. So all of this, the way that Django works is that you have your models, which work with database, and then you have your views, which is all of the processing logic that's then passed to the templates, which are the HTML. And all of the JavaScript lives in that HTML. That's the template. And even better, Django loads static files separately. So you can, we would put everything in there. We have, that's separate from everything else, separate from the templates. And that's sort of what I meant when I can say this plays very well with Python frameworks, because you can separate it out that way. And also for stability reasons, we always download everything and run things locally. We don't use CDNs. And then your second question, could you repeat that?
So for instance, if you have a GeoJSON call, that would lead to the user being able to retrieve that GeoJSON file themselves as well. So for that instance, how would you restrict the data to be visualized but not retrieved directly from the user? So meaning that if I want to do, if I want the data, like the raw data, I can get it, right?
Yeah.
So how do you protect those data just to visualize?
So two aspects. One, an API key would be a great way, or some sort of authentication process. Right, lots of different tools use that, or they have caps, right? Even for the Chicago data portal, City of Chicago data portal, if you don't have an API key, it'll limit how many times you can hit those endpoints. That's one way of protecting it. Another thing is through encryption. We encrypt a lot of our files in black box. I'm not sure how that'd work with data, but it's something you could theoretically do on the DevOps side on the server. But we're all about open source, and in particular, open data. There's a lot of the kinds of data we work with. We work with criminal justice data. We work with organizations that have a lot of data, scientific institutions, but don't know how to make it open to the public. So that's what we're all about. Yeah.
Yeah. Could you tell a little more about the specific tech that you do and how people outside of DataMade could contribute?
Yeah. Yeah, I'd love to. I want to check, though, are there any other questions related to this before I geek out about how much I love my company? No? Okay. Was that a hand? No? Okay, cool. All right, yeah, so DataMade. Oh no, you're gonna see what the internet thinks I wanna read. And I think it was about cats and it was right. Okay, yeah, so we specifically deal with kind of one, civic technology, but also specifically data. So that's including data tools. That's something that we use, that we work with a lot. We work with journalism organizations like the Better Government Association. So what they did is they FOIA'd and they collected every salary from a public servant in Illinois. And they want to make that available, one for the entire public to use, and also as a tool for their journalists. So we took all of that, we built this tool. I helped with some of the SQL queries on it. That is my contribution. And making it clear, wow, our mayor earned more than 100% of the other employees. Fun fact, sorry, like the highest paid person is like the airport commissioner, and they make like $300,000 a year, which is what we know now about that. We also do visualizations. We have partnered with the city of Chicago a lot for the large lots program. That's like if you live on a block that has an open lot and you have lived there for more than 5 years, you can apply to purchase the plot of land for $1. So we have a visualization of all of those that are available, and also a streamlined process for people to apply and also see the status of their applications. We also have a couple of tools. Councilmatic is something that is really based on transparency and really kind of goes to the roots of what we mean in civic tech, as in empowering citizens to have a voice in their democracy. So for that, we have a way for you to track your aldermen, see if they're going to meetings, how they voted, things aggregating data that would otherwise be difficult to find. And then we also have dedupe, which isn't specifically a civic tech tool, but we developed it for a civic tech purpose, which is campaign donations are a total mess. I don't know if anyone has ever seen that. There's a website called Illinois Sunshine, which we also built, that keeps track of who is donating to political campaigns in Illinois. And if I submit with like my middle name, that's different than if I don't. And if I do it in all caps, that's different if it's in lowercase. And you have to find a way to reconcile those entities. So dedupe is a deduplication tool. I really like spreading the gospel of dedupe because I had to use it for a story I was working on for Southside Weekly. And something that would have taken people like 8 hours to do took me 2 hours. And it wasn't me, it was a computer and me waiting for the computer to do it. And it's free for journalists to use. We do a lot of work with visualization and mapping. Those are kind of and specifically also data storytelling, like working with a lot of, like I said, like academic groups that want to access a more general public, but maybe don't have, one, the technical acumen to do that, and also the communication skills. So that's where we come in. Cool. Any other questions?
May I ask a question about visualization per se?
Sure.
So, what have been the most efficient approaches that you've been following to visualize exploded data into facets? First, number, like on the data. Second, dimensions.
Well, those aren't things that we deal with, so I don't think about those a lot.
I'll come across that beforehand.
Yeah.
It's very hard to succinctly present it.
Yeah, I think that's a problem that has stumped many researchers, right? I did work in a machine learning lab for a while, and that was the greatest problem, is that we had no idea how to visualize like however many dimensions. And you can try to aggregate it, you can try to flatten it. One technique that's used a lot is, I can't remember the name, but it's an acronym that my professor in college made us all memorize. But yeah, it's usually like taking things and then trying to reduce dimensions down. Yeah. Yes, those two. Those are, yeah, so those are taking highly dimensional plots and then like making them into a matrix formation, like a two-dimensional matrix, and it groups similar pieces of data together. It makes sense when you think about it as a picture. Unfortunately, like the best example I've seen was somebody who like classified a bunch of different vibrators that way. And that's just what I think of when I think of that kind of map. Yeah, so that's something to take into account, many different dimensions. But yeah, that's not something that we deal with a whole lot, but it's definitely right, like an active area of scientific inquiry.
I think.
Sorry, there's one more.
Wrap it and then have people come to you.
Oh, okay, sure. Is that okay?
Yeah,
Okay,
I
cool.
don't want to let the questions gone way too long.
Yeah, no, that makes
But
sense.
anyone
Yeah.
has more questions, like come ask Jasmine. And thank you again for that talk.
Yeah.